This morning, we're going to continue on, take up where we left off, so to speak, but I didn't time it very well towards the end before I left, and so kind of ended up in the middle of Matthew 24. And so at the risk of being boring or whatever, I don't think you could ever call Matthew 24 boring, but I do want to kind of reiterate stuff. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but we had gone through the end of through Matthew 23, where Jesus is upbraiding the scribes and the Pharisees, calling them hypocrites and vipers, and Luke kind of summed it up, talking to those leadership of the Jewish folks. Woe unto you, for you build the tombs of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. In fact, you bear witness that you approve the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore, the wisdom of God also said, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they'll kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, may be required of this generation. Yes, I say unto you, it shall be required of this generation. So made the point that what Jesus is talking about, and this vengeance that's going to come, would be upon that generation that he was speaking to. And I'm just going to briefly go through Matthew. I'm not going to read it or anything. I'm just going to pick up points to remind us what we looked at in Matthew 24. At the beginning of Matthew 24, Jesus' disciples showed him all the buildings of the temple and how marvelous and wonderful the place was. And Jesus said, do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say unto you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. It's all going to be destroyed. And we looked at the temple area, 35 acres, that's 34 football fields in size, had 27-foot high columns in these colonnades that you see. And it wasn't even finished when Jesus spoke the words that it's going to be torn down. And it wasn't completed until 4 years before the Romans invaded Jerusalem. Anyway, I made the point that all the documents relating to the existence of the Jewish nation as a physical nation, all those documents were stored in the temple complex. All the genealogical records, the biblical manuscripts, the legal records, all of that stuff was stored there, and it all got burned when Jerusalem was destroyed. And looked at these couple of pictures of the temple area. You see the Dome of the Rock there in the middle. That's standing right where the temple was. You can see that that whole area was level, and until the Dome of the Rock was built, it was just flat. There was nothing there, not one stone left standing upon another, just like Jesus said would happen. That's another picture that I took that's kind of at sunrise. And so anyway, bottom line is that whole area happened just like Jesus said it would, not one stone left standing on another. And so when he said that, then he left Jerusalem and went down through the Kidron Valley and up to the Mount of Olives. This picture here, I'm standing on top of the Mount of Olives, or on the side, pretty high up on the side of the Mount of Olives, looking at Jerusalem. When they got over there, down through, this is the Kidron Valley down here, when they went down through that, back up to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples asked him the question. They said, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so we talked about what question they were actually asking. And in order to find out what they were actually asking, we went to Mark chapter 13, where Mark records the same event. And he says, tell us, when will this happen? when shall these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled? And Luke says the same thing. They ask him, Teacher, when will these things be? What sign will there be when all these things are about to take place? That was the question that they were asking. Matthew adds, and what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? King James Version says end of the world, which is, well, technically it's not a mistranslation, but it's misleading because the word is aionios, is where we get our word eon from. An eon is an age, so to speak. And in their, Matthew is writing his book to Jewish folks, and Luke and Mark are writing to Gentiles. The Jews, for them, having this temple come down was the end of the world for them. That was the end of life as we know it, so to speak. And so Matthew adds that for, that's the disciples were thinking, well, the only way that's ever going to happen is at the end of the world. But the real question, as Luke and Mark record it, was, when's this going to happen? When is it going to happen that there's not one stone left standing upon the other? The temple will be destroyed. And then we looked at what Jesus starts out by answering the question. He first of all says when it won't be. He said a lot of stuff's going to happen. There's going to be many people coming saying that they're the Christ, and there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. And he says, don't be troubled, because all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And he says nations are going to rise up against nations, and there's going to be earthquakes in various places, and pestilences and famines and all that kind of stuff. And I pointed out that Alfred, in his commentary on Matthew, Alfred is a noted scholar. In his commentary on Matthew, he talks about three different threats of war against the Jews by the Romans, 3 uprisings of the Gentiles against the Jews, in which many thousands of Jews were killed. An indefinite number of famines happened, at least 1 pestilence in which 30,000 people died in Rome alone, and 5 earthquakes, all before AD 70. And so everything that Jesus said would happen, all those things happened before AD 70. And Jesus said that they would happen before the end came. And he also said that there would be a tribulation. They'll deliver you up to tribulation. They'll kill you. You'll be hated by all the nations. False prophets will testify against you, all of that kind of stuff. And because of that, the love of many would grow cold. A lot of people would leave the faith because of the heat that was being kindled up by the Romans and other people who were against the Jewish nation. But he said, whoever endures to the end will be saved. And he said, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come. And I pointed out that in Colossians 1:23, it says, this gospel, which was preached in all creation under heaven. Now, Colossians was written about 62 AD. So by the time of 62 AD, the gospel had spread throughout the world. And Jesus says, and then the end will come. And so he said, that's when it won't happen. Now here's when it will be. Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, like Daniel spoke of, I'm not going to go through all the passages, but in Daniel chapter 11 talks about the abomination of desolation. Daniel 12 talks about the abomination of desolation, and he's talking about invading army coming in and occupying the temple, being an abomination because only Jews were allowed to go in there. And Luke chapter 21, he applies it to this time, the destruction of Jerusalem as well. when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you'll know that its desolation is near. And so Jesus says, when you see that happening, he's talking about the Roman armies. When you see them coming, get out. Let those that are in Judea flee to the mountains. If you're on the housetop, don't go down and get your stuff. Just get out. And he said in verse 21, for there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor shall ever be. And so this tribulation that was going to happen with the destruction of Jerusalem was unlike anything that had been before or would come after that. No tribulation matches that. The word tribulation, the great tribulation, is spoken of a lot by people when they look at the book of Revelation, and Jesus says this is the tribulation that's unmatched. This one here that's going to happen, and I'm not going to go into it, but I read these passages from Josephus. If you remember how horrible it was, Josephus even said that nothing like that's ever happened. And he says, I hate to say it, but in this part here, he talks about a terrible event in which a mother killed and ate her own child because the famine was so great and just terrible things were happening. They're fighting against each other. And I guess I'm just going to skip past all that. From all of our studying that we've done in the past, looked at all the list of the high priests and of the Roman Caesars and the Roman procurators and all the changing and the stuff that was going on, the rebellions that were happening, the zealots, and all of this stuff and then in the destruction of Jerusalem, all the infighting that was going on. There were factions, the zealot factions, and the ones that were siding with the Romans. You know, they occupy us, we need to render to Caesar what's Caesar's, kind of thing. They were fighting with each other. They were burning each other's storehouses full of grain and making it so that by the time the Romans came in, people were eating their shoelaces or eating the rubber of the leather of their sandals and trying to chew on straw and anything that they thought might possibly have something to fill their stomachs. They were trying to eat, including this woman that we read about, that Josephus recorded. So anyway, things were really bad. And I don't know if there's anything from this thing. Well, he said it's going to be obvious. People are going to say, "Here's Christ, there's Christ," or whatever, but don't believe it. You're going to know it when it happens. When you see this destruction getting ready to happen, you're going to know that Jesus is there with the hammer, so to speak, there to bring judgment. And he said at the last part here, "For wherever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together." The symbol of the Roman army was the eagle, and the carcass was Jerusalem. Jesus had told them in Matthew 23, "Behold, your house is left unto you desolate." It's empty. It's just a hulk because God's not there anymore. And so where the carcass is, then the eagles are going to gather together, and that's exactly what happened. They had killed the prophets, and Jesus had said, "I'm going to send you apostles and other prophets, and you're going to kill them too, make you guilty." And so all the vengeance of God for all the prophets is going to come upon Jerusalem, and it's going to be in my generation. Well, I just want to, well, I guess in this part here, in Matthew 24, 29, 31, he talks about the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. People try to make that be the rapture, but when he's talking about coming with clouds, he's talking about, it was a very familiar term from the Old Testament that was equivalent to saying it's going to be a really dark day. Sun's not going to give us light. The moon will be turned into blood. That's what happens in an eclipse. If you've ever seen a full eclipse, the moon turns red, dark red. It doesn't give very much light. And that same language is used concerning Babylon and Edom and Egypt and Israel about their own destruction in times past. And I put those verses in here, which I'm just going to skip past because they're all talking about a dark day in those nations. It was going to happen. God was going to destroy them. And so, let's see. In this section, he talks about the Son of Man coming in the clouds, and he says the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And talked about the fact that just like clouds are unstoppable, so is the Lord's coming in judgment is unstoppable. It's also used, that same terminology of the clouds, coming in the clouds, is used concerning Egypt and concerning Israel back in Isaiah and Jeremiah's time. Gene?
Now, these are these same words quoting from the prophet Joel, I believe. Now, what do you understand what you're referring to there? Referring to crucifixion and sun darkened, or
What specific language are you?
Peter said that these men aren't drunk, as we thought, that this is what is spoken by the prophet Joel. Sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon into blood before that great and noble day of the Lord shall come.
Yeah, I think that happens quite often. It's talking about a dark day, and certainly the crucifixion of Jesus was a dark day that would happen. And Joel also talks about your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men you will dream dreams and such things. And he applies that to what happened with them when the Holy Spirit came upon them, and they were speaking in the tongues of all these different nations of the world that had come to Jerusalem for that Passover. And so, yeah, he's there in Joel. He's referring to the coming of Jesus' death on the cross, and then the resurrection and the coming of the Holy Spirit and the beginning of the kingdom. Yeah, and that's what he's talking about. That was the death of Christ was. I mean, things are kind of relative to each other, but it was for the world. Well, you want to say it was a very dark day for the world, but really it was the happiest day ever for the world, because that's what brought forgiveness to all mankind. Would have a chance to be forgiven because of what happened to Jesus. But certainly for Jesus, it was the darkest day of his life, and it was a dark day in history. The Messiah was killed, and that sort of thing. But this day that Jesus is referring to that would happen was also a dark day, and it was going to be the end of the Jewish nation as we know it. And again, I'm going to skip the verses here about the coming in the clouds because we talked about them before. But it's important, I think, to reiterate this passage from Matthew 26, where he talks about where Jesus is talking to the high priest during his trial, and Jesus says to him, well, just looking down here, nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter you, Mr. High Priest that I'm talking to, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. That's when the high priest tore his clothes and said, that's it, we're done. we're going to kill this guy. He's spoken blasphemy. But he said, you're going to see it, not somebody else down the road. You will see this happening. So anyway, in Matthew, in the last part of it, he said, and he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. And so that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, when you see the armies assembling, get out. That was when the angels were gathering everybody from wherever they were from, those that believed in Jesus, and got them out of there, from wherever they were, so that they would be protected from being destroyed during this great tribulation, during this great destruction that was going to take place on the city of Jerusalem. And I mentioned before that the Christians believed in Jesus and all got out before the end. They all went to Pella, or not all of them, but a lot of them went to the city of Pella to get away from the destruction of Jerusalem. Well, that's about where we ended up last time. And so we're going to continue on now with chapter 24, where he says, now learn this. And actually, we got a little, I went fast through this part, but what I wanted to emphasize last time before I left was that Jesus says, assuredly, I say unto you that this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. So everything that he had just said, it's all going to happen before this generation passes away. And I pointed out then, and it's important for us to see it now, in Thayer's Greek lexicon, says the whole multitude of men living at the same time. That's what a generation means. And he specifically says, Matthew 24:34, it refers to the whole multitude of men living at the same time. That's what a generation is. So when he said this generation, all these people that are alive here right now, that generation will not pass away until everything that I have said is going to happen. And so then I'm just going to start with verse 36. So on that day and hour, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Remember, they had asked Jesus, that was the question. The question was, when's this going to happen? And Jesus says, it's going to happen when you see all these signs, you know what's happening. But he says, but that day and the hour, nobody knows. Nobody knows exactly what day or hour it's going to happen. I can't tell you that answer. And so he's still answering their question. When's this going to happen? And Jesus says, I'm not going to tell you the day of the hour because I don't know it. Only the Father knows it. And so he says, for as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. They were just living their lives, just like nothing was different. Nothing was going to happen. They were just living their lives until Noah entered the ark, and they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. And so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two men will be in the field. One will be taken, the other left. Two men will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and would not allow his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. So Jesus said, I don't know what hour it's going to be, the day of the hour. Only the Father knows. But one thing I know, it's going to be a time that you're not expecting. Just like the people did not expect a flood to happen when Noah was building the ark. They were ridiculing him and everything else while he was building it. And then the rain started, and by then it was too late for them to do anything about it. He says here, two men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. People today, a lot of people think that's talking about a rapture that's going to take place where, who was it? What's the guy's name that did the, anyway, about being left behind, or anyway, I can't remember now, but this isn't talking about a rapture. What he's talking about is what he has just been talking about, and that is that when the time comes, get out. If you're on your rooftop, leave. What happens if two guys are on the rooftop? One of them believes in Jesus and the other one doesn't. He's going to take off, and the other guy is going to stay there. Wherever people are at the time, when you see the signs, the coming of the abomination of desolation, when you see the Roman armies approaching, get out. The ones that believed what Jesus is saying right here got out. They left. The others were left behind because they didn't believe. They didn't realize that they needed to get out of there. What they did was they ran to Jerusalem instead of running away from it. And that's what he's referring to here. And like he says, you need to watch. And what are you watching for? You're watching for these signs that were going to happen, so that you could do something about it. What's the point of watching if you're not going to do something when you see whatever it is you're watching for? When God comes again for the final judgment, what good is it going to be doing to watch for it? Where can you run? Where can you go? You can't do anything. So whatever he's talking about here is not the second, is not the final judgment, the final coming of Jesus for judgment, but he's talking about a time where they would have an option of doing something else. Because if you're not on the ball, you're going to get destroyed with the rest of them. So anyway, he says then next in verse 45, for who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say unto you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But that evil servant says in his heart, but if that evil servant says in his heart, my master's delaying his coming, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come in a day when he's not looking for him, in an hour that he's not aware of, and he will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. What was it? He's talking about this master, the one that was given authority over a household. That's the Jewish leadership. God had given them authority and the responsibility to take care of his household or his nation, and that was their responsibility. But what did they do? He's not coming back anytime soon. And so they were just mistreating the servants of the master, the servants of the house owner, I guess you would say. They were beating them, which is the thing that he had been getting after the scribes and the Pharisees this whole time. You're guilty of all the prophets, because you're killing. First of all, you're glorifying the tombs of the ones that actually did it, with Jeremiah and all the prophets of old. And now you're going to kill the prophets and the apostles that I'm sending. You're guilty of all of it. You guys are supposed to be taking care of my people. Instead, you're hurting them. You're beating them, and you're just having a good time eating and drinking with the drunkards and everything. And that's the life that was happening right when Jesus was speaking. And he's just saying, when you don't expect it, when you least expect it, God's going to come and bring judgment on you, and there's going to be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. And if you don't think there was weeping and gnashing of teeth in the destruction of Jerusalem, you haven't read Josephus, or you didn't listen when I read those passages from Josephus, because it was horrible. Terrible things were happening. And it was definitely at a time when they were not aware of it. And so in verse, he continues on in verse, what verse is this? Verse 1 of chapter 25. Then the kingdom shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. We all know this, or most of us at least know this story. Now 5 of them were wise, 5 were foolish. Then those that were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, so our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, no, we're not giving you ours, lest there not be enough for us and you. But you go rather to those who sell, and you buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterwards, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, assuredly I say unto you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour which the Son of Man is coming. And so he gives this parable of the wise and foolish virgins, the whole thing, trying to prepare the people. You guys got to be prepared, because you don't know when he's coming. And if you're not ready, he's going to be coming, and you got to be ready to go. And if you're not ready, you're going to be left holding the bag, so to speak. And it's not going to be good for you. But he keeps talking about the Son of Man coming. And then he says another parable, for the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, and the other 2, and another 1, to each according to his ability. And immediately he went on a journey. And then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more. But he who had received 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with him. And then he who had received the 1 talent, well, pardon me, I must have missed the whole section there. So who had received the 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. And he also, who had received the 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. And his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Notice I'm going really fast through this, because when we get to this part in Jesus's life, I'll slow down on that. But I just wanted to add Matthew 25 to Matthew 24, because it's all talking about the same thing, and I'll show you how I know that in a little bit. Anyway, then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you've not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seed. I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. I didn't lose it. But his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, You knew that I reap where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. You ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And he cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. So here's the parable of the talents, which we've all heard, and I'll be talking about them again when the time comes. But the whole thing there is God expects us to live a profitable life, and that means he gets more out of us than he puts in, so to speak. It's just like when we make a profit, you spend a certain amount of money on goods and employees and everything, and then those employees make whatever it is, and then you sell it, and you end up with a little bit more than it cost you and your employees and in all the production process and everything, and that's called profit. So God puts effort into creating us to make us come into this world, and he expects us to be like a factory or whatever you want to say, and bear fruit for him, so that it's more than he had to begin with. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And when those people were not doing what Jesus had told them to do, they were not giving back God more than he had given them, especially as a nation of Israel. The judgment would come for them. Now, I'm saying that this all was talking about the time that Jesus was referring to in the destruction of Jerusalem, the end of the Israel as we know it. But just like any other passage of scripture in the Old Testament or New Testament that may be applied specifically to a time, if the same conditions happen now, don't you think the same principles would apply to us as well? And of course it does. And so even though, as you look at this, we all want to make it be the end of time when we all have to give an account for what we're doing. Yes, it does apply to the end of time as well. But what he's talking about is then, and I'll show you why right now. As we read the next phase. Well, pardon me, let me go back. He says in verse 31, for when the Son of Man comes in his glory, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate them one from another as the shepherd divides the sheep from the goats, and he will set the sheep on the right hand, but the goats on the left. Now, when is that going to happen? We all want to, it sounds like the end of the world. That's what it sounds like to us. It's always sounded like that to me. But Jesus has already given the answer as when that's going to be. And it's an interesting coincidence, but that's exactly what we'll talk about today in my lesson during our worship service. I didn't coordinate this on purpose, but it's one of those incredible things that I believe the Spirit's working. Anyway, he had already told his disciples this back in Matthew chapter 16. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But in Matthew chapter 16, he said, for the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels. Exactly the same phrase, the glory with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly, I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. That tells you when he's talking about the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and he will reward each according to his works. Isn't that exactly what he's talking about here? Son of Man comes in his glory, all the angels with him. He'll sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered, and he'll separate them one another, and he will give to each the reward that they deserve. Jesus said, that's going to happen while some of you are still here. Some of you who are alive right now. And I'm not talking about you guys. I'm talking about the ones Jesus was speaking to. Jesus said, some of you guys, you apostles, you other disciples, are not going to die until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. It was going to happen in their generation. What he's talking about was going to happen in their generation. And here's what's going to happen. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. I don't have time to finish reading all this, but it's about, Jesus said, whatever you do to the least of these of my people, you've done it to me. Whether you've mistreated them or whether you've treated them well, it's like you're doing it to me. And those people that had mistreated the apostles and the prophets were going to get their judgment with the destruction of Jerusalem. And those that had treated them well would be spared, that kind of thing. But just like I said earlier, this language applied to them. But it also applies at any time when the conditions fit. When Jesus comes again for the last time, that's the same principles apply. There will be judgment then too. And unless we lead profitable lives for God, unless we treat his people nicely, compassionately, and all that, then we're going to reap judgment, just like the people have reaped judgment all down through the history of the nation of Israel. So anyway, I wanted to throw that in specifically because I believe Matthew 24, 25, and both are talking about the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. And I just told you why I think that's the case, for two reasons. One, he said, this generation will not pass away till all these things be accomplished. And then he also said, when the Son of Man comes with his holy angels, he had already told them when that was going to be in Matthew 16, and that was during their generation, while some of them were still alive. So any questions or comments? I know that's a boatload of stuff I've just talked about, but and if you have any questions more, we can talk about it next week as well. If not, class dismissed, and look forward to having our worship service in 13 minutes. Well, it's been just about 6 weeks since we talked about Jesus's life for the last time, and so we're going to get back into it. It might have been better, I suppose, if we had rearranged our services to have the Lord's Supper after this lesson. Probably see why as we get into it. But before I get in, I just want to say appreciate all you guys. I missed you all while I was gone, and I knew you guys were taking care of business while I was away, and I really appreciate that. Especially appreciate all those that filled in for preaching and teaching the classes, and making arrangements for to fill those spaces. And so want to make sure I acknowledge appreciation for that. I told the class before that I got to preach in Texas while I went to Arizona and was there one day, and then drove 8 hours each way to Texas to take my sister and brother-in-law over there. And anyway, I had a great time, and I really appreciate you guys letting me have a chance to go away and enjoy the Normally it's warmer weather. It wasn't all that warm in Arizona this time, but I still had a good time, enjoyed family, and got to be with my sister. I never know when it's going to be the last time that I see her. She has MS, diabetes, heart issues, and she was in the hospital 3 times while I was there, and in a rehab center for the last week and a half that I was there. So that part of the visit could have been better. Didn't get a chance to really enjoy her company like I normally would get to, but at least she was feeling better when I left. Hopefully things will improve if they can figure out how to regulate her blood pressure and get her to eat again so she'll have some strength back. But anyway, I appreciate you guys praying for her and praying for Sue and I while we were gone, and we had a good trip down, and I had a good trip back, and so we're back now, and so everything should get back into the swing of things. I just appreciate all of you folks. Scripture reading to get us back into the life of Jesus is from Matthew chapter 16. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and raised the 3rd day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." If you remember back 6 weeks ago, we talked about Caesarea Philippi and how it was a den of paganism with the worship of the god Pan, and how also I showed pictures of it being the sword, right? Caesarea Philippi right there coming out of the cliff is the Jordan River, and how amazing that place is. And Jesus had gone all the way up there with his disciples for the purpose of getting them to confess that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God, and to impress on them how great a foundation from that cliff that was there, like a Petra, a great cliff, compared to a rock like Peter. The confession that he made that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God, was the foundation upon which the Lord's church would be built, and all that gates of Hades, the paganism, everything around that would not stop that from happening. Well, they left Caesarea Philippi, went back down towards Capernaum, and when they did that, it was really the beginning of the end for Jesus as concerned. He began to prepare his disciples for his death. As you might imagine, being a Christian, we all have our ideas of how things should be based on what we've learned and studied from the scriptures and what we've been taught. And this was no different for the disciples of Jesus. They had been taught stuff by their rabbis, but they'd been taught wrongly about who the Messiah was and what he was going to do when he came. They had the idea that he was going to set up an earthly kingdom, and he was going to deliver the people from whatever thumb they were under at the time. In this case, it would be the Roman Empire. And so that's what they were expecting, was this Messiah that would do that. But Jesus is going to tell them, that's not how it happens, guys. And so he needs to prepare them. And it says in verse 21 of Matthew 16, from the time they got back into Capernaum after this great confession, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and be raised the 3rd day. I don't know how many times I've read that and just kind of skimmed over it. Yeah, Jesus told his disciples he's going to die and blah, blah. And that's pretty much how I let it go. There is so much in that. We're not going to dive deeply into it, but one thing I want to do is give you all an assignment. That is, every single night, starting tonight, the last thing you do when you lay your head on your pillow, after you've said your prayers and are ready to fall off to sleep, I want you to start thinking about, I just want you to think about what we're going to be looking at in the lesson today. What Jesus must have been thinking, what he must have been feeling, knowing that the end was coming for himself and that he had to prepare his disciples. Well, Matthew tells us from that time was the time when Jesus had less than 1 year to live. Less than 1 year to prepare his disciples for their life after he was gone. I don't know how we can even imagine what weight that was upon his shoulders of knowing not only that he had less than a year to live, but he knew when, as we're going to talk about in a moment. But knowing that he only had less than a year to live, he began to show his disciples those disciples, as we've seen many times, had a lot to learn. They had a lot still to learn in only less than a year to learn things. And they were in a very vulnerable state. Many of the disciples of Jesus had taken a hike when he wasn't what they were expecting. Not his apostles, but people that had been following him. And so his own apostles, the ones that were his closest ones that he was going to send out into the world, he had to prepare them for his death, which they were not expecting. And he needed to break it to them gently. He couldn't just blurt out, "Hey, guys, I'm dying. Get over it." You know, he couldn't do that. If he had told them bluntly and uncompassionately or whatever, they would have all just taken a hike right then. He needed them to stay with him, but he also needed them to, I mean, they were shocked enough, as we know from looking back ourselves, when he was killed, but they at least had been prepared by his speaking. They didn't like what he was saying, as we'll see, but he needed to break it to them gently. And what he needed to break gently to them was that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and be raised the third day. Notice he never mentions the Romans here who actually killed him. But who was it that really killed him? It was the elders and the chief priests and the scribes that were responsible for Jesus's death. And he knew that when he set foot on the pathway to Jerusalem, that he was heading down there to his own death. That's one of the things that I want you to think about when you lay your head on your pillow every night this week, is what could have been going through his head, knowing I'm on my last journey. Now, a lot of things are going to happen between now and when he gets nailed to that cross. Many things he's going to teach and things will happen to him, but he knows he's on his way. And Jesus knew exactly the time that it was going to be happening. Now, we all know that we're going to die, but we don't know when. We all like to think it's going to be down the road a ways. We think that, but we don't know when it's going to be. Jesus did. We're going to see later on in this series of lessons that Jesus is going to tell him the exact day that he's going to die. When it gets closer, he's going to say, 2 more days and I'm out of here, or 2 more days and I'm going to be nailed to the cross. So he knew the day and he knew how it was going to be. And when you think about the things that he suffered from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, besides being killed, when he got down into Jerusalem, they were constantly trying to kill him, constantly trying to trap him and get any excuse they could to do away with him, having that pressure on him every time he came in contact with these scribes and Pharisees. And then when the time did actually arrive and he was betrayed by Judas, these guys had paid Judas to betray him. Then he went before their council. They brought liars forth to testify against him falsely, and just all these things going through. I couldn't help but thinking about some things that we've seen with our own eyes recently with the last president that we had that spent his entire time under siege from the people that didn't like him. They wanted to get rid of him any way they could, bringing false accusations of conspiracy with the Russians and China and all that kind of stuff. And then we had a I wanted to say high priest, a Supreme Court justice appointed, and to try to get him appointed, remember the false testimony that was brought against him, accusing him of a horrible thing, and just we all felt with them how hard that was, but that was nothing. None of that was anything in comparison to what Jesus was going through. And that was before they ever sent him to the Romans, where the Romans, part of this fake trial, they ended up washing their hands of this death. Even they knew it wasn't right, but to appease the crowd, they beat him mercilessly, as we know, and then nailed him to a cross, and he died. So he suffered many things from the chief priests, the elders, the scribes, and then was killed. And the good part about that, and we'll talk about in a little bit, that he would be raised on the 3rd day. But he knew exactly what was going to happen. Even though there was a silver lining to this cloud, there still was the cloud that Jesus had to endure. And I want us to get to a point where we try harder and harder all the rest of our lives to become more spiritual, to have the Spirit of Christ dwelling in us. And to have that happen, we've got to actually in our hearts, we've got to become Jesus in a way. And I don't mean be perfect and be able to do miracles and that sort of thing. But Paul said in Galatians 3:27, for as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. And it's like, first of all, he says, you're baptized into Christ. You're baptized into this relationship with him. You're in Christ. You have put on Christ like you put on a garment. And so Paul also said, it's no longer I that live, but Christ living in me. And in order for us to have Christ living in us, we've got to know the most we possibly can. We've got to try to feel his feelings and have his words be part of us. Jesus said it earlier, we've already looked at this, where Jesus said, you eat my flesh and drink my blood. In other words, make me part of you. That's what we need to do. And so when we look at this passage that Jesus was telling him all the things that he had to undergo, we need to try our best to feel those feelings and to take Jesus upon us. And that's why I'm giving you the assignment of thinking about these things at night before you go to bed, and to try to truly appreciate, see if you can feel the feelings of it. And the better we can do that, the more spiritual we will be, the more close to Jesus we will be. And if we're close to Jesus, we'll be close to the Father as well. And so I just hope we'll all do that. There's a saying that says, the clothes make the man. If we put on Christ, that's our we're clothed upon with righteousness. We're clothed upon with his righteousness, and it's like we're wearing him, and that will make you the man that God wants to see, having Christ living in him. Well, Peter didn't like hearing what he was hearing. I don't think he heard that last part where it says, I'll be raised on the third day. What he said was he took Jesus aside, as Peter will do. This is impetuous Peter, that he's always the one that pipes up, talking before he really thinks things through. He took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." No way, Jesus, that's not going to happen. And in his mind, we see later on, he took a sword and tried to stop this Jesus from being taken. He was ready to fight for Jesus in a physical way, but he just says, "It's not happening. We're not going to let this happen to you." And you can just imagine what's the feelings behind that for Peter. Wait a minute, I've been following you for 2 years, 2.5 years, and you say they're going to kill you, and where's that going to leave me? Where's that going to leave all of us? No, that can't happen. And so he's trying to tell Jesus, no, we don't want that to happen. But Jesus responded to him by saying, he turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." So Jesus calls him Satan. Really? One of his favorite disciples, one of the three that got to do things that some of the other apostles didn't get to do, and he calls him Satan. Well, he also says, "You are an occasion of stumbling for me." That's one of the jobs that Satan takes upon himself, was to throw things out in front of us that will cause us to stumble, cause us to sin. And that's exactly what that phrase offense means, where he says, "You are an offense to me." It doesn't mean Jesus is not saying, "Oh, I'm offended that you said that." No, it means you're throwing a stumbling block in front of me. That's what an offense means in the New Testament. And so that's what Peter was doing by saying, no, this can't happen. We're not going to let this happen. Well, what was going on through Jesus' mind right now? Yeah, it has to happen. If it doesn't happen, what'll be the result? The world will die in its sins. This has to happen. As well, in his humanity, Jesus didn't like the idea any more than Peter did. He was later on going to pray, "Father, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me." He didn't want to do it. On the other hand, he did want to do it. That's why he came to this earth, was to live a perfect life so he could be that sacrifice for all of us. But he was so tempted. Let me out of here. I don't want to have to go through this horrible crucifixion. And for Peter saying, no, it's not going to happen, that was an occasion of stumbling for Jesus. And so that's why he called him Satan. You're playing the part of Satan, Peter. You got to get back and get out of that role, because this thing has to happen. And then he adds something that they're really not going to like. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Now we're going from Jesus telling them, look, guys, I'm heading to Jerusalem. We're going down there, and what's going to happen is I'm going to be mistreated by the leadership of the Jewish people, and ultimately they're going to kill me. And then, fortunately, I'll be raised up again, and whatever else he might have told them. But he also says, you're going to have a cross to bear yourselves. If anyone, that includes you and me, anyone, not just his current disciples, desire to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Well, I used to wonder, Jesus hadn't even died on the cross yet. How did they know what he might be talking about? Well, answer is really simple. They knew all too well about the Romans and their crucifixions. We've been studying about the Romans and how they were, and there's procurators in the land, and if people didn't behave like they should, they would come in and stomp out rebellions and whatever. And one of the ways they stomped out those rebellions was by hanging people on crosses for everyone to see. You act like that, that's how it's going to end up for you. And one of the things that they did was they had the people carry their own cross. Now, some scholars think it was just the cross piece of the cross that they would put over their shoulder, and they would carry it to the place of crucifixion, and it would be hung up on a pole. However it worked, taking up their cross meant being ready to die, being ready to go to your death for this. And that's what Jesus said. That's what I'm requiring of you. You've got to be willing to take up your cross, follow me. Whatever life or death brings you, that's what you need to be ready to do for my cause. What was Jesus about to do when he said, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna be killed? I'm gonna take you onto my shoulders. You are my cross. I'm going to take the burden of all of your sins upon me, take them to the cross, and make them go away. If you have faith in me, he carried our cross he carried his cross for us. We need to carry our cross for him. And that's what he's saying. That's what's required. Sure, salvation is free. We can't earn it. We can't possibly earn it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have a cost. Jesus had a cost that he had to pay, his own life. And we have costs that we need to pay in our lives as well. It might be our own life, our physical life, we might have to give for the cause. That hasn't happened for a while, in America at least. It's happened other places, but it could happen, and we've got to be ready for that. Well, how do you think the disciples felt when they heard those words? You may have to die for me. It's one thing to think, no, Jesus, it can't happen to you. What about yourself? It could happen. So he was preparing these guys. He said, for whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Now, really, there's life, and then there's life. There's this physical life that we live while we walk here for a short period of time on this earth. But then there's our real life, our soul that lives on forever. It's going to live or it's going to die, one or the other. People want to save their earthly life, want to keep from getting killed because of the Lord. If you want to save your life, you're going to lose eternal life. If you lose your physical life, it will get you eternal life. When we give our life for his sake. For what profit is a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? Now, then he says, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? There's two places that he says soul here in those last two sentences. It's the exact same word that he said life 2 times in the first sentences. It's the Greek word that literally means your life, your that part of you that has life, and that part of that life that will continue on. But what he's saying is that we've got to be willing to give up this earthly life if we want to have eternal life. Then he says, for the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each one according to his works. This is a verse that I read earlier in the class, talking about when it was going to be that the destruction of Jerusalem was going to take place, the end of life as they knew it, with the destruction of Jerusalem. And he said, the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and he will reward each one according to his works. That means accountability. We have accountability. The things that we do or not do in this life will be judged by. We have accountability, and each one of us will be judged according to his works, just like those people back then were judged according to their works. What he's saying is walk the walk, not just talk the talk. We like to say we're Christians, but are we ready to follow in the footsteps of Jesus? Then he says, assuredly I say unto you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Judgment is coming. He's talking to his disciples there. He's not talking about the end of the world. He's talking about the judgment that's coming on the people of Israel. He says some of them would see it with their own eyes. There are some standing here who will not taste of death till you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. They would see it with their own eyes, but by saying some are standing here will not taste of death, what does that imply? Some wouldn't make it that long, and some didn't. We know from reading Acts that James, the apostle, was killed by Herod, and Stephen was stoned, and various things like that. I'm certain there was ones that died for the cause that are not mentioned in the scriptures, but some of them would. And so as we sum up this, Jesus knew several things. One was that there was a cost to pay. He knew ahead of time, I've got to go to the cross. I've got to pay the price of my life, because that's what I'm here for. In order to bring salvation to mankind, there has to be a sacrifice, and it's up to me to do it. He must deny himself, just like he was asking his disciples to do. He had to deny himself. He didn't want to do that, but he had to deny himself to let himself be put to death. But he also was looking forward to a great reward, not just for himself, but for all the people of the world. If he did this, if he accomplished that death and that suffering, he would be rewarded with the knowledge that everybody on this earth can have a hope of eternal life through faith in him. He also knew this, and that is that there was a cost to pay for the disciples too. They had to pay the cost of discipleship. They needed to deny themselves to follow him. That means us. We need to deny ourselves and follow him. We must take up our cross, be ready to die for him. And as Jesus said, and follow me. That's what I want us to take away. We need to follow Jesus. We need to have him as part of us and let him live his life through us and be the kind of people that he wants us to be in this life and truly be spiritual. And so as we get ready to sing the invitation song, I chose this song, "Where He Leads Me, I Will Follow." Can you say that you will do that? That wherever it takes you, I've got my cross, and I'm going to take it wherever it needs to go. If you're here today and you have not been baptized into Christ, you have not put him on, and you need to do that, and you want to make that decision to follow him wherever he goes, wherever he leads you, I'd encourage you to do it. And as we sing the invitation song, if you want to come forward and make that desire known, you're perfectly welcome to do that. If you want to tell somebody about it after church or whatever, you're welcome to do that too. But just think about Jesus and how wonderful it is of what he did for us and how we need to make him part of us. We need to follow wherever he leads. So as we stand and sing this song, think about the invitation that Jesus extended for us. Where he leads, I follow.